Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. Is everyone comfortable enough? Okay. Oh, good, good. Thank you. Thank you for that. Okay. Yeah, if you want to sit down in the front, you're welcome to. We have some floor space here if anyone wants to sit in the front. Okay. Welcome to the SFPC Code Society's Winter 2019 Student Showcase. SFPC is an artist-run school whose motto is more poetry, less demo. And a student of Code Societies today pointed out that they didn't really identify with the less demo part of the motto. And for anyone who isn't familiar, I thought that made perfect sense. For anyone who isn't entrenched in a commercial tech industry, the culture is really focused around this idea of a demo, so showing your work by this like live demo where you're selling a product. But students today are going to be presenting their work more thinking about presentation as a medium, as a performance. We treat technology, we engage with technology a little differently here at SFPC. And today we're also at Westbeth Artist Housing, a live-work affordable housing space for artists which have first housed the Bell Research Labs, developing the early stages of electronic communication that so many students use today in their work. After becoming artist housing, it has fostered the creative process of many artists, including John Cage, Diane Arbus, and Merce Cunningham. SFPC, the school, has 10-week and 2 to 3 week intensive sessions. So Code Society is an example of one of their 2 to 3 week intensive sessions. And all of the School for Poetic Computation sessions explore the poetics of computation, and sometimes also the politics. Taeyoon Choi, a co-founder of SFPC, will come up at the end of all the students' presentations to share with you some amazing programs that are happening here in the coming months. We value inclusivity and diversity, so please get in touch with us here tonight to ask more questions about any of the programs we have running in the next years, months, days. Please come. So tonight is the culminating night of Code Societies. A temporary school, a collection of teachers and students, a learning society enmeshed in coded systems. A 3-week session where we collectively engaged with experiments of automated language, critical simulations, and Terraformer time capsules, among other things. We asked, how do different platforms and processes, including algorithms, data collection, devices, and networks, yield distinct modes of seeing, thinking, feeling, and provide structures for social organization? As artists, designers, poets, and denizens, how then can we begin to build the processes and relational practices we want to be a part of? These are some of the elements of a code society. I want to give a special thank you to the 3 work study students, Nicole Chang, Mimi Joanne, and Emma Ray Norton, for tirelessly writing blog posts and, yes, posting so much social media to help you communicate about this event and what we've been learning in our classes. And none of this would be possible without 2 TAs, Ying Kwan Tan in the back and Nabil Hussain, for just doing such an incredible job of being a steward of the space for the teachers, for the students, and for the showcase for you, the community. Yeah. So I'm gonna invite Nabil to come say a word for a moment.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nabil. I was one of the TAs, like Melanie mentioned, for the session. I'm also an SFPC alum from last spring and also from a summer program the year before that, where actually Melanie was my TA for that, and Allison, who was one of the teachers here, was also one of my teachers. Yeah, I just want to say what a joy it was to work with all of the students during this time, and all of the teachers, how much I learned from all of you. Yeah, I feel like these last few weeks were so hectic and so fast. Like, I feel like I was just starting to get into a rhythm and get to know people and get used to y'all. And now it's like, oh, now it's leaving. But what I think one of the things that I've had experience at all my experiences at SFPC is that the time is very compressed in terms of what we learned, but then you still have your entire life to keep unpacking and learning and building community with everyone. So I just want to say to all the students, especially, like, don't be a stranger. Y'all know me, you can hit me up anytime. And I hope that all of you enjoy their presentations and get to learn something from what they took away as well.
Thank you, Nabil. One sec. So when designing the curriculum for Code Societies and thinking about what kind of classes and what kind of education I wanted to cultivate here, I thought of all the technological, social infrastructure and platforms that are governing so much of our lives today, both the most intimate, the most bureaucratic, the most mundane, the most horrid. And I imagined the engineers and the designers who make those software platforms and that infrastructure, and what kind of education I would want them to have. And that's helps me guide some of the classes that I bring here. This session is equal parts hands-on coding and critical theory classes, but all the classes with computational or hands-on coding instruction do so with immense care to couch that within a context of poetic practice, of artistic practice, and ethical practice. I've had the incredible privilege as the organizer of Code Societies and the opportunity to invite some of my favorite teachers to teach, and along with the students, I have learned so much as well. So thank you to Allison Parrish, who taught the computational scrawl, American Artist, who taught software as ideology, myself and Nabil Hussain, who you just met, who taught computational methods of Code Societies class, Bufu, an artist collective who taught Wi-Fi, stands for with you, for us, for you, exercising technology, Dan Taeyong, who taught ethicsware, Everest Pipkin, who taught building nets for floating data, Fluct, a dance and performance duo who taught We Play Programmed, Ingrid Burrington, who taught network terraforming, and there are posters in the back that are a combined effort of all the students who were asked to pick an artifact of society that they would want to show a far future civilization to indicate like what this society was about. So to take something very specific that says a lot about our culture or a culture and a society that exists now. And those posters are in the back, and if everyone here took 10, we would run out. So please take them. I also taught a class called Cybernetics of Sex, Technology, Feminisms, and the Choreography of Culture. Taeyoon Choi came back for a second time to teach Distributed Web of Care. And Nora Khan taught Critical Simulation. And on the last day of class, Critical Simulation, she asked students to simulate for each other and through drawing the kinds of societies they would want to live in. Ones that decenter human intelligence, ones that don't treat difference as error or glitch. And the students came up with so many ideas, but suffice it to say, we arrived at something generous, rhizomatic, and blob-like. So I thank the teachers and the TAs and the work study students. And now I want to thank and to congratulate the students. It has been an incredible 3 weeks. And I'm so excited for what they'll show, because this is such an intensive program that we had class every day that I barely know what they're going to present. So I, along with you, the SFPC community, will be equally surprised. Thank you to all the students for their commitment, for their care, for their willingness to take risks, and for challenging themselves and creating together one of the million possible societies of a code society that could have been. So this is kind of their graduation. This is the last thing that happens. And I'm so proud of them and with them. So please join me in a round of applause for all the students of Code Societies Winter Night 2019. And I would like to welcome the first student, Yasmin Kaja, to the stage.
Hi everyone. Good evening and Masa al Khair, which by the way I'd like to thank Nabil Hussein for starting that exchange between us, saying Masa al Khair, because I can't remember the last time I said it to someone or heard it from someone. And that's a lot of what I got out of this program and what I'd like to share with you all tonight. The work of creating a community at Code Societies is what I keep going back to. A community made up of a million different thoughtful exchanges between people, and in this case, exchanges in ideas, in smiles, in contagious yawns, in granola bars so generously provided by Melanie, exchanges in rocks, thanks to Ingrid Barrington, and exchanges in worlds. Everyone comes from different worlds, and in 3 weeks, my brilliant peers here were able to share a space and create a world together. So I moved to New York about 5 months ago to start a design research program at School of Visual Arts. But I found myself running in constant mental circles, not knowing how to explain the fact that a single interaction, a single exchange, or even a single piece of information is in fact never singular at all. I couldn't divorce the idea, essentially, that the spread of internet memes and the introduction of agricultural processes onto this earth are in fact exactly the same. And one of my instructors in the fall suggested that maybe I was trying to do an anthropology on myself. But really, I was thinking a lot about what the culture in Kuwait is composed of. This is the onion model of culture. And as a nation state, Kuwait, where I'm from, is composed of so many external commodities, but more importantly, the kinship rooted in the country's Bedouin tribal culture is to me the environment in which all else changes. In Dan Tyon's class, Ethicsware, I worked on making a chatbot, or a chat non-bot, because they're not chatbots, that didn't really try to respond to what you were saying. So the chat non-bot, I was thinking of phrases and sayings that could work in any situation, phrases that were so obviously canned. And then I thought about the affective exchange economy of the sayings, Allah Kareeman, Inshallah. So in Kuwait, or even the larger Arab world, these ubiquitous sayings are used in almost any conversation, regardless of context. They become atmospheric sayings. So for example, if I say good night, someone can respond with Allah Kareem. It's not necessarily what the phrase means, it's what the phrase does. So going back to this model of culture, we can say that there are values embedded into these sayings. They are values of kinship. And the sayings themselves are symbols of kinship. They signify the values. And so in creating this chat non-bot, I try to transcend and move through symbols and values, the practice of culture, by actively putting myself into this feedback loop that starts to generate and create culture. Because of the generic nature of the response that you'd get in this chatbot, the feedback loop seems almost impossible. It seems like a shutdown of the conversation. So I say, hi, I'm feeling better than last night, but very malnourished, Allah Kareem. Yes, I might get some rest, but might also just not, Inshallah. So it's not really giving me anything, but in fact, the feedback loop is so nuanced, and it's in these nuances that I find the glue of kinship. And what turns this interaction into a small reflection of larger cultural practices may be traced back to the etymology of the word culture, which Melanie shared with us during her cybernetics of sex class. So culture, in Latin cultus, to care, to tend to. I'd like us to think about the relationship between our idea of a community and our idea of the world. Is there ever really an end to a community and a start to a world? The world exists outside of us as an objective entity, but the objective world is so out of reach because we are all subjects. So our communities are our worlds. And to loop back to the idea that an interaction is never singular, I invite us all to think of a recent message that we have maybe sent or a recent message we have received. And messages here, of course, do not only mean texts or emails or anything bound by language. A message is a signal of sorts, it's a symbol. And further, I invite everyone to think about what cultures this message belongs to, and maybe what kind of culture can it create. Thank you, and I'd like to thank everyone here for coming, but also mostly thank you to Code Societies. I'm very full of everything.
Hey, what's up? My name is Carlos. And today I kind of want to talk about the artist's website as a shifting landscape. So a little bit of background on this project. Prior to starting Code Societies, a friend of mine approached me about doing a website for her. And kind of like once in the program, we decided to use the website as a place to experiment and also as a place for me to use as like a consistent reference point throughout the 3 weeks of class. So in her latest piece, Fright, she kind of embodies 4 different characters as the main character leaves her country of origin, and she distinguishes these characters through specific movement vocabularies as well as moments of voice and song. So I wanted to show a quick excerpt from the piece. So what you're kind of seeing there is a transition from the main character, Fright, to a character called the Dead Woman. There are a lot of moments of transition like this. So when beginning to think about the website more concretely, we wanted to come up with like a model to think about the relationship between these characters and how each one of them is interacted. And the metaphor that we came up with is the embodiment of character as structured through its relationship to its surrounding influences. Influences in this case can mean anything from like other characters in the piece to its perspective on its place like within the environment. And so 2 important features about this kind of like method of embodiment is that it's very fluid and has a capacity to change constantly based on its kind of like experiences, and also that it's not seeking to be understood. So for the website, we decided to do like a really simple gesture in the navigation using a JavaScript code which randomly sorts all of the links on the page every time you access it. So this is kind of an example of different kind of like compositions that the user might see when first going on the page. This is an example of what one of the project pages would look like. It's pretty like standard, nothing unusual is going on here. But when going back to the page after exiting a project page, this new kind of like form enters the background. And these are basically a series of collages that I made out of the process notes that we had written down like at the beginning of thinking about this project. Another project page, which is like pretty standard. And then another form enters a background. And this is kind of like a cumulative effect. The more you exit project pages, the more kind of like forms go in the background and kind of like the random scattering of links continues. And so in this way, the user is forced to reorient themselves on the page in a way that's similar to a witness of the performance having to reorient themselves to like different enactments of character. And this is still very much like a work in progress, but we're excited to see where it goes. And thank you so much.
Hello. All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Sunny. I'm a curriculum developer at Codecademy. And my final project here was a computer-generated poetry. I'll put it out using a typewriter and Raspberry Pi with zeros and ones. And this is inspired by Alison Parrish's class. It was done, some of it was web scraped with Beautiful Soup. And the texts were connected with Markov chain using Trigram. And the training set was actually a couple different things, all weighted equally. One was our Slack history at Code Societies, and one was all the text from the discussion notes from TAs and the required readings. And before, as pretty brief, I just want to read one of them. I run the script well over 100 times, and a lot of them were kind of random. And this one I actually thought was pretty neat, and I called it, "Can It Be Too Late?" cause and effect sense of self, wanted to break open how we relate to institutions in order to better observe the environment, discussion of origin of the text and its visual presentation, and also wanted to just be at home, cook, and being in our communities. Can it be too late? Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Ingrid, and my final project is a set of instructions for collaborative drawings that are generated from a number of source texts. So this means I need your help in making these drawings. In the other room, there's a station with paper and charcoal, so feel free to get messy. And this is basically an asynchronous collaborative project, so one person will be working on the project or on the drawing at a time. You'll also see a set of instructions that have been generated, and they're in a kind of a curated order, so you can respond to the one on the top of the pile. So these instructions were basically formed from Markov chain models that were provided by Alison Parrish, so thank you very much. I played with different source texts. Some were a little more straightforward, just about kind of drawing and illustration, but I wanted to play with different levels of abstraction in the instructions. So some of them also were based on other forms of craft, like knitting and furniture making. And even further along from that, there's some about kind of social behavior and nature as well. So I wanted to explore how generating instructions algorithmically might lead to different forms of kind of abstraction in instructions. I think a lot of times when we think about instructional art, we think of maybe the work of Sol LeWitt, where his instructions are rather prescriptive. There's not a lot of room for interpretation. It's almost an act of dictation. But we might also think of the work of Fluxus in the 1960s. Their work was basically a set of instructions for different performant acts. But they were definitely more poetic in nature and allowed for a lot more kind of interpretation. So I kind of wanted to strike a balance between these two styles. I really didn't want this to be an act of dictation. Instead, an experience that really kind of values collective ownership and creation, and obviously people's own creativity. So after generating kind of many instructions, I basically selected the ones that felt most kind of actionable, but also had a nice level of poetry to the language. And then from there, I ordered them very intentionally based on kind of what I felt worked best linguistically and functionally, and creating the best flow. So a few examples. So this would be for one drawing, and one person would do a different line, basically. So the outline of the earth, opening of a circle, raise the horizon, let us divide it into 4 or 5, change the form rather than individuals. 31 lines of life, divide the baseline, an upright plane of shadow. So the line breaks were actually a result of the character level Markov chain. Another one, first draw solids, we draw the plane, shadow of a table close to us. Perhaps the above figures are in one figure, produce the division. So there were some other ones that were interesting or beautiful or funny, but didn't quite work in the final sets of instructions, like to draw the curve of a soul from each corners of nature. Now we will cube to the pure and awful form of the cube. And my favorite one, give me health and a vanishing point. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Nicole, and today I'm going to be sharing a little bit about my journey at SFPC and also kind of like my motivations for coming into Code Society. So I entered this space thinking that I was going to upgrade my environmental ethic. Essentially, my background is in environmental studies, and I thought that being surrounded in this like world of tech and computing, I'd like learn something about progress and modernity that I wasn't getting at school. But I found out that most technologists don't even really think they have bodies at all. And like, yeah, there was just I really lost my way, kind of found myself back where I started in my undergrad, thinking about like neoliberalism and like manifest destiny and American frontierism that are really at the core of internet infrastructure. But rather than going on a further tirade of neoliberalism, I'm going to try and be like a little bit more helpful and give you some warm, fuzzy things that I found here. One of the things was poetry, really thinking about how computing, like with teachers like Dan, thinking about how to make a chat non-bot, lol at my woes, in order to kind of get at this question of whether we can humanize technology so it can be in conversation with us rather than commanding it to serve us. I thought that Taeyun's proposal of a distributed web of care was really beautiful, and we did this exercise where we kind of like danced around with each other, thinking about how we could embody this web and try to follow people like Flucht in recognizing how performance can be behavior and a way to kind of feel less controlled by our increasingly programmed minds. And through, classes like with Ingrid on network terraforming, we did this project where we would like find different elements we found on Earth that we thought were worth telling people of future Earth or non-Earth, I guess. And one of the things that I looked into was looking at how like Inuit culture understood space and time. I was trying to think about how an ancient technology could help guide us in present day. So these are Insui. Oh, I guess like Google Slides doesn't recognize Inuit language. Great. But basically, these are stone structures that would be built by Inuit cultures in order to navigate the Arctic tundra. And they carry the mean Inuksui means that which acts in the capacity of a human. They're also used in present day by First Nation activists like Wendy Bush, where she's building these in order to honor murdered and missing Indigenous women until the Canadian government recognizes that they're doing this. Something else that I was also thinking about was mushrooms, like you'll be hearing from Nadia later. But basically thinking about Anna Singh's essay, Unruly Edges, Mushrooms as a Companion Species, and how biological and social diversity huddle in neglected margins, and maybe thinking about internet infrastructures kind of collecting like mushrooms in the seams of empire, the kind of internets or technologies that we want to consume congregating at the edges. With these thoughts in mind, I created these little sculptures that you can see in the other room, trying to feel how it would be like to create an internet of edges. There isn't really like a neat way to kind of sum up all the wonderful things that we've been thinking about at Code Societies, but I guess I just leave you on this like emotional note that I kind of feel like I'm not dead, I'm dormant. And yeah, thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to be doing a poetry reading based on a poem that I created using predictive text generation, which pretty much takes a bunch of source text, learns from the source text, remixes it, and then creates something new. So the topic that I really wanted to explore in my poem was really motivated by this question that I ponder often. Why does nothing change when after there's like a data breach, or when we find out that a company deceptively promises to protect our data, but instead uses it for things that don't benefit us? So I wanted to really look at the language that tech companies were using. And so I pulled quotes from public apologies after these incidents were happening, and mashed it together with a transcript of a speech that Jeff Bezos gave around how Amazon came to be a successful company. So the poem that I'm going to read is called God View. It's just very difficult, my decisions. We won't prevent all mistakes, or business mistakes, or business mistakes, or business mistakes, or hiring mistakes. I think we have a special product team working to fix our issues together, and computers are good at organizing such large selections of products. But we also decided to use our skills and the assets that we've acquired over time to open up a hamburger stand and a hot dog stand, and so on and so on. I think we doubled our productivity, triple the normal odds. We will also give you an easy way to Seattle from a cell phone. And then, of course, there's space. I'm optimistic that we've made even more. You want customer obsession. And you can tell anecdotally, even though there wasn't good research on this hard cement floor. I'm serious about doing what it takes to protect our community. It had to be something that could only be done in that way. It's clearly going to be free, can only do that through ads. It's hard to do anything, I think. Whatever it is that you want to do, there is going to be risk in your life, and risk is a necessary component of progress. So it was late, and I had to be grounded. We've made a bunch of reasons. I mean, who chose me to think about making that kind of characteristic for business? I like to thank all of you who continue to believe in our society. And yes, here at Google too. We're appalled and genuinely sorry that this happened. I guess I have to, because of where we are. Sincerely sorry for the right tools to do harm. But I recognize we have led the internet in building tools. We were packing on our platform. I suspect it may help me over the long term. We will keep building, we will keep building, we will keep building. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Nadia Ortalt. I'm going to be talking about this project that I put together after a lot of thinking about politics and capital and money and rituals. So Nicole talked about fungus a little bit. Mushrooms, to me, symbolize a lot of different things. They are a source for ritual for a lot of communities, and they have been throughout time. But they also have this kind of passive way of appearing on the margins and terraforming the world in different ways. So taking things that are rotting and dying and turning them into something that's actually nourishing. And kind of in conjunction with mushrooms, I've also been thinking a lot about capital and about equity, both monetary equity, but also equity between people. And this is somebody that you might all be familiar with. He's Mike Bloomberg. And in fact, his fund is one of the funds that has invested in a company that I started. And then I started to think about, like, why are we all here and who has actually given us the capital to be in this equitable space? Interestingly, Mike has also allowed for a couple other SFPC students to be here. And when I say allowed, I mean he has indirectly provided the capital for some of us to be here. And I've also been thinking a lot about communion and the idea of communion between people, of intimacy through communion, through the idea of reception, which is also a very gendered kind of idea, especially in a religious context, but also trying to sort of reframe it and think about how communion can actually be a really powerful thing to receive something from another. And in fact, the idea of the Eucharist, the Catholic communion, is also very, I think, profound when thinking about bodies and physicality and flesh, the idea that you could ingest or consume the body of another person and sort of engage with them in a new kind of ritual. So to return back to the project, I think a lot of us, we sort of repeated this idea over and over again and really sort of gnashed our teeth at the idea that New York is increasingly becoming a place, and the world is increasingly becoming a place where our presence, both digitally and in the flesh, is owned by the rich. And I think what I wanted to do is to give us a ritual to reclaim our bodies by eating theirs. And so some of you might have seen the mushrooms in the back. Essentially what I did is I took this text, Mushrooms and How to Grow Them, and I also did a really in-depth kind of creepy research project into every single SFPC student and their last job. The board of directors at investors of investment firms and companies that invested in those companies. And I did a web scrape of all of those people. So everybody who's in SFPC has indirectly, sort of been given the capital to come here through those people. And I merged them together using a lot of code, amended code that Allison Parrish worked with us through. And I turned those into poems around the fruiting bodies of each one of these investors, these rich people with capital who've in some ways allowed us to be here and in other ways have kind of destroyed our lives. And so this is a poem for Mike Bloomberg, stem yellow and varying reddish. If he was an elected organism, which it is enough, the stem thick, pores also internally resonant. Is that as Mayor Mike takes? Citizen Bloomberg connected by 5 flat screen computerized voters. So there's poems in the back. These are supposed to be prayers that you say ceremonially to yourself before you consume the body of these mostly men. You recite your prayer and then you eat his body. And in some ways, it's a way to recapitulate the body of these people into your own and reclaim a new kind of ritual. Thank you.
Yes, I just want to say Nadja's one for me was spot on. It was extremely, mine was Bill Gates, and I ate Bill Gates' body, and I feel a little healed. It's been good. Anyway, yeah, so I'm Jacob, and I feel very happy to be here. So this is an image of, this is what I see when I open up the internet. And I built this throughout the course of the class, and I wouldn't have come to anything remotely like this if it weren't for all of the dialogue and discussion that people brought to the table. And so yeah, this is like, oh, I got some of my friends here. I don't need to know everything that's going on in their lives. I don't need their full names. We're just all hanging out and we're having a good time. Through the process of making this stuff, when I first got here, I felt like I had this very manifesto attitude towards all this. Oh, we don't need all these social medias and blah blah blah, all this stuff. And so I rode down on this horse and entered this sea of ideas. And I'm like, oh my goodness, what is all this stuff? And it heavily impressed upon me the seriousnesses of this world that I'm in and around, and all my past and all what I represent when I arrive here. And so I had this blog, and I'm writing all these things, and it's blah 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 jacobswebsite.io, and it was AC who mentioned to me this thing about the IO domain that I'm using on my site, and it has this sort of sad and oppressive history. This is a still from a documentary, Stealing a Nation, from 2004, which is about the story of the Chagos people who were on an island in what is now the British Island Ocean Territories, and they are still trying to get back to their place. And if you go to, it's the Chagos support group is the people to check out if you want to learn about how to help the situation. And so yeah, this whole thing about domain names kind of set me off. I was I'm oh my gosh, I have all these sins to repent for now, and what do we do? We're stuck in this way of being on the internet, and it's what you can't even connect to somebody your friends to talk to them without using this vast array of technologies that are kind of just put there and that nobody decided on in this caring way. And so what the thing I sort of arrived at, and this is how you get to my little internet page, is you have an internet number. So so we have phone numbers, and they're secret, and you don't want people to know about them, and that you don't advertise them or search for them on the internet. And an internet number is also like that. It's called an IP address, and anybody can have one. It costs $5 a month, and if you make one, I would be the happiest person in the universe, because then we could talk to each other. And this is a drawing that Tayun, one of the co-founders of the school made, and I still don't know what it means, but I want my internet to look a little bit more like that than it does right now. So where does that leave us? Like, there's like a good opportunity, and when I look at around this room to show and to like become what could be in the digital world, and I don't think I've like been more like optimistic than like right now with like every like big institution that I've been a part of about like what could be on in the future. So I hope to get a message like this from you on my little internet page very soon. That would make me very happy. Thank you so much.
Oh my gosh, thanks so much, you guys. I'm really happy to be here and to be able to pitch this to you. I've been working on it for very long, just the duration of this class, and it's been really amazing to be able to put something at stake in it. So, I'm gonna drain the feed here for a minute. All right. So I've in like working with this, I've spent a lot of time on Medium to do this for you, and I realized that the trick to doing a good pitch is you really have to call in the whole social totality into question, and that's hard. It's like one thing to change the world. It's another thing to just call everything into question. So here's some. Here's what's been going on. Striking Iron, the art of the African blacksmith, slated at the National Museum of African Art, February 27th, will be delayed or canceled. Preparing for other exhibitions, the National Portrait Gallery's Votes for Women, A Portrait of Persistence, set to open March 1st, is also weeks behind. C100 Whitney staffers last November signed a letter of protest to Warren Kanders of Safariland, the private defense company holding down the border, and his ties to the museum. The Smithsonian continues to lose $1 million a week. The Whitney offers free entry to the museum for federal employees. And see what else? Bill Viola realized that at a certain point that his life is his art. That is really what he is. The work is indistinguishable from him. This is a platform, and it's a practice, and it's a startup, and it's a pitch deck. Studio Visit app is a platform for practice. We're going to build it, then we're going to destroy it, then we're going to build it again, then we're going to get somebody else's money, and then we're going to do it better. And this is how it's going to go down. It's going to be kind of like a dating app and kind of like a GitHub account when you can like really commit. And and there's going to be some fun like venture crypt paywall features too. So like Venmo for your studio practice, because it's about people who practice. And what is practice? Practice is kind of like work, only instead of working on something, you're working through something. And that's and you get to work through it, because right now the relationship between history and its discourses is a wall, essentially. So there's this. So there's practice communities. That's all we can actually promise at this point. I think the trick to making a good thing is to don't make the best decisions, just make the most decisions. And do it for each other, do it for yourself. Don't do it for, just do it for that. this is who we are. This is all we have. Come and fill out the office hours spreadsheet that I forked from Melanie. It already works for you. Nothing, it's already a great product platform. Please come see us. Thank you.
Wow, that was great. Whatever it is, like I want to be part of it. So I'll talk to you after. So hi, my name is Iris Chu. Thank you so much for being here and supporting our community. So for the SFPC panel, I made an alternative news network that generates Trump news that combines Graham's fairy tale stories. So the stories are supposed to invoke the feeling of reading headlines, but the more you read into it, the more fantastical they become. And it's also supposed to mimic our experience reading news in 2018 and 2019. So this little guy did most of the work. So I became of how false predictions in news can actually affect our real life in 2016 when the inaccurate poll data affected voter turnout. And in Edison's class, we learned about how to train a neural network and how dangerously easy it is. So I became very curious about what the machine would think the future is for news. So after days of training and this little guy working, this is what the algorithm came up with. So for people who can see, I can read a few of this. First one is very catchy. China faces charge of Iran nuclear tests. Women's over abortion law. Gay marriage lives in America. So some of these sounds pretty realistic and very dark. So I realized that the algorithm is making all the red correlations between keywords that are surreal, cynical, slightly entertaining, and can go wrong in so many ways. And my brain sees this list as news because it is pretty much trained on the same data set. So I'm a New York Times subscriber. And when I look at this list, there's almost a closed feedback loop. The more it feeds me information that makes certain correlations, the more I perceive them as news. So that's not good. So I wanted to put something in that can break that feedback loop. So I thought about Graham's fairy tale. It's equally dark, cynical as 2019 news, especially Trump stories. So it actually works great with Trump stories. And the title, I kept the original machine learning generated Trump news title. And then the content is a blend between the fairy tale and Trump news articles that I found in New York Times. And the algorithm is set up so that the more you read into it, the more fairy tale there is. So I want to point out that the same old thinking will always generate the same old result. I think from this project, I really learned that machine learning, like many other predictive models, can put us in this closed feedback loop. And that's what ultimately generates cultural and political bubbles and makes this country polarized. However, machine learning does do a great job at detecting some of the biases in the data sets and also our culture in general. So maybe instead of using machine learning to feed back into a product to make profit, we can actually use it to check our biases. And if some of you works in tech and does machine learning, I encourage you to do a thought experiment and look into your data and think, what does this tell us about our society and what biases is embedding in this data set? Still have some time, so thank you so much for everybody who's part of this program. Thanks, Edison, for teaching me Python in 2 days. And it's been a great experience. Thanks for all the organizers.
Hi everyone, my name is Mimi, and I want to use my time here today to talk to you about why I came to Code Societies. So I'm in my last semester of undergrad, and I come from an academic background where I have a lot of experience with computer science, theory, and literature. And I very quickly realized that the versions of the future that were being built in my computer science classrooms weren't versions of the future that I wanted to be a part of. These versions of the future were highly corporatized, optimized for surveillance and advertisements, and I didn't care for them. I'm really interested in versions of the future that feel more equitable, are more adaptive, and are more accommodating for experiences of alterity. So this is one of my favorite Twitter interactions of all time. One, because of the content and also of the people in it. So Jungle Pussy is a Brooklyn-born and based rapper who uses her music to criticize the systems that she exists in. And Anil Dash is the CEO of Glitch. Glitch is like YouTube or SoundCloud, but for bots, VR experiences, web apps instead of music or videos. And anyone can upload a project. So the goal of Glitch is to lower the barrier of entry and to democratize the experience of the web. And you can start your application from scratch, or you can remix something that somebody else has already built. And writing code is very much a form of world building. And as of right now, it is used as a means of delineation between people who make the world and people who are just users of it. And I think this delineation between users and world builders is a fiction. And in this narrative, users have very little agency over worlds that are being created. But the thing about fictions is that we don't have to adhere to them if we don't want to, and we're free to envision fictions, new systems that are better than the realities that we exist in. So I want to read to you a quote by one of my favorite authors, Adrienne Maree Brown. Science fiction is simply a way to practice the future together. I suspect that is what many of you are up to, practicing futures together, practicing justice together, living into new stories. It is our right and responsibility to create a new world. Code Societies has felt like a 3-week-long science fiction world-building workshop. Our homework for the very first day was to think of a system or a code that we exist in, and then in class, we mix them with someone else's system to come up with new ones. So in this exercise, Emma and Ingrid came up with the shuffle bus, which is a bus that sporadically reroutes itself, so you never actually end up where you want to go. And AC and Emily invented a bathroom network so that whenever you are in a bathroom, you can communicate with all the other people who are also on their phones in the stalls. And in our last class with Nora Khan, we were assigned to draw 2 images, God's eye view of society as technologists see it, and another of a simulation we would actually want to live in. And then in class, in pairs or threes we combined our simulations together, and they were all incredibly different and very blob-like, because I guess none of us are very tied to our corporeal forms. But they were all the same in that they were very open. These worlds there was no violence, and we were very willing to embrace complexity. And in Emergent Strategies, Adrienne Maree Brown also says that once upon a time, people were unable to conceive of a world beyond feudalism or the divine right of kings, but that time ended. And so eventually, so with this one, the only constant is change. It's my last slide. So what comes next? What science fictions are already within you? How can we imagine worlds that are more equitable, more sustainable than the realities that we exist in? How can we begin to manifest them individually and collectively with one another? And I wanted to show this gif of a mushroom because mushrooms are an incredible symbol of resistance and resilience as well. It said that the first living thing to come back to emerge from the blasted landscape of Hiroshima was a mushroom.
Hey everybody, I'm Jarrett. I'm a web developer, and my project was called Git Commitment. And Git Commitment is really supposed to be, it's a data visualization tool that measures your contributions to your relationships. So it's a calendar. Every square is a day, day of the year. And the more contributions you make to your interpersonal relationships, the darker the square becomes. So it's only January, so I've only filled out through January, and then 27th. And it's really just like the underlying data is really just a comma-separated values file, like you would make in Excel. And I'm asking you to count every day how many contributions you made to your relationships. And it's kind of a send-up of the GitHub contribution graph. This is my GitHub contribution graph for the last year. And GitHub has specific criteria for what constitutes a contribution. So if you commit a line of code to a repository, you review someone else's code to make a comment on it, if you make a suggestion, a pull request, these all count as contributions. But the thing that data visualization like this can't do is measure the significance. So if your contributions to make a to correct a typo, so you misspelled hello, that is the same way as fixing a typo that would change the syntax of code and have it actually run. So there's a kind of flattening. And I came to this project a lot of different ways. One way is lately I've been thinking a lot about emotional labor and the responsibility we each have in our interpersonal relationships. And also on the first day, we were asked to consider like experiences and things in everyday society that act as code. So this sketch I made in conjunction with Carlos on like our very first day at Code Societies. And it's this idea of the sentiment "I love you" as an automatic response that triggers a loop. So, you know, when you say "I love you" to someone, hopefully you'd hope that they say it back, and you would hope that it has like a genuine sentiment behind it. So you say "I love you," you expect "I love you" back. So it's like an automatic trigger. And the idea of this sketch is like if you perceive your response as authentic, it loops back in because, you know, if I love you, return I love you. And if it's not authentic, that would send you into another loop where you have another query to say why this inauthentic, why is it not authentic? And so kind of the questions that I brought with me to this is like what qualifies as an emotional contribution? It's something that kind of inherently resists computation. It's something that kind of resists being quantified. And so you could view this on one hand as like a mindfulness tool, as in like, what am I doing in my day-to-day to make my relationships better? But it also kind of lends itself to like gaming the system. Like, what if you just want to fill out your chart? What if you just want to what if you want to go through the motions and pretend? And it's also, I'm also kind of trying to question the idea of a contribution because there's no actual way to know what is meaningful. So you could bring someone a gift and maybe they don't care about it. And in your head, it was a big deal. In their head, it wasn't. Or maybe you smile at someone and you didn't think it meant anything. And for them, it changed their whole day. So yeah, these are kind of the questions I was considering. And what's gained or lost when we quantify something? What nuances are flattened and that we no longer consider? And when we try and render it as data, especially something as complex as emotion. So yeah, thank you.
Hi, I'm Emily Saltz. Thanks for coming here tonight. So my project is called Super Sad Googles. So here's a screenshot of it. You can play with it back there. So what it is, basically an interactive autocomplete corpus of people's super sad or weird or funny or intimate Google searches. I pulled these searches from almost 400 from a combination of places. A bunch of people have actually already asked this on like Reddit and Quora, so I got some of their answers. ad hoc scraping of just different searches, and also from some of you. I sent out a survey to the Eventbrite and sort of spammed some Slack communities, and so some of your sad searches are actually in this product right now. So why do I care about sad Googles? So I've been thinking a lot about what is this relationship that we have with Google search, late at night when we're typing these things that aren't even really things that Google can answer. So I think of it sort of like a confession booth. So when we're typing in, we're sort of tapping into this mysterious sort of mystical fount of wisdom. Will anyone ever love me, for example? So imagine you're this kind of Victorian lady. I'm going to walk you through a little scenario. So you're very pious. You're looking for love. Victorian guys are kind of lame, and you feel like your clothes are too plain. Your family cobbling business is about to go bankrupt. So you confess all of this, right? Except of course, it turns out who you're really confessing to is this for-profit platform called Google, who doesn't really know what to do with searches like this. So it just treats it like any other search, and it's like, okay, I'm gonna take some of those keywords you gave me, give you some stuff you might be interested in. Maybe Victorian men aren't for you. Maybe Men Overboard, Key West. So that's sort of why I care about these sad searches. But I think it's deeper when you think about the fact that other people's sad searches are surfaced through autocomplete. So why care about this? I'm really interested in this idea of autocompletes as a medium. What is in that list? It sort of crosses a bunch of different domains for me. So one of those being just the psychology. How does it actually influence what you're searching, what you're thinking when you see some of these other searches? There's an image on the right there of, women should. This was from a UN rights campaign. These are real searches. How does that influence you when you see things like that? Another area is design. Autocompletes are designed. I've helped design them in some cases. And there are a lot of really conscious human decisions that go into which searches are surfaced when and why. And then you sort of obscure the fact whose searches even are those. And then finally, I think you can sort of think more broadly about the nature of predictive text and auto-completions and how our brains sort of do that as we talk and listen. We sort of have our own internal autocompletes as we listen, trying to predict what's going to come next. So I think that's a really interesting question that didn't fully get into here. So some things that I've learned from the sad Googles in this experiment: we're really tired. A weird number of searches about being tired. We all want friends. There are a lot of really touching and relatable ones about people looking for friends, wanting more friends. We all feel inadequate. A lot of really sad ones around that. And then some sort of wild card weird ones where it's I'm not really sure what was going on with so I really want to know why the cat pooped in a circle, but I don't. So you can check it out. It's super sad. Googles.glitch.me. It's also back there. And I just want to thank everyone at Code Societies. It's been amazing 3 weeks. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tushar, and my project is an asemic artifact, which is an interpretive typographic artifact made of designs, which I'll talk about in a bit. But first, about Code Societies. At Code Societies, we engaged in conversation about technology and society and how both of them sort of exert influence over each other, which is, I think, an interesting and important conversation to have in the time that we live in. One of the exercises that my classmates also spoke about was Nora Khan's exercise, where we had to draw what society looks like right now from a God view and what I would want it to look like in the future, which was way harder than I would have imagined. It was just because when you think about what do I want society to be like, you think about things like freedom of choice, you think about morality, you think about ethics, and then you're like, do I want to control other people and make them do things that I want or what I think is right? But then where does freedom of choice go in that? So it's just, it was kind of a complicated answer for me to find. And I thought that was really interesting. And it was also interesting to see what other people found important in this conversation. Another interesting thing that happened at Code Society was a class on asemic writing that Alison Parrish gave, which at first seemed really strange to me because I was like, asemic writing, which is writing which doesn't have a meaning. Why would anyone want to write something which doesn't mean anything? Like, what is that about? But as I explored more, I thought it was really interesting because I started thinking about where have I experienced asemic writing in my own life. And I started thinking about, I have a book in Japanese and in Arabic, which obviously are languages that I don't speak, but just having those books, I own those books because they're beautiful and they make me feel something. And that is asemic in its own way. I also love music by Devendra Banhart, who is quite funny. And I know lyrics to most of his Spanish songs without knowing what they mean, which is also asemic in its own way. So as I started exploring this concept more, like, and I was talking to Alison about it, what happens when you strip away meaning from words? What is left? What is that, those markings, what do they communicate? How do they communicate that through maybe the paper they're printed on or just visually what they look like? That was a very interesting exploration for me. And then tweaking around with the code that Alison shared with us, I came upon characters which sort of told a story to me. I felt weirdly attracted to them. They seemed mystical and occultish, and I don't know, it seemed like there's some like great wisdom in these characters that's trying to come out through them. So then I started arranging them in these geometric forms and made these designs. And the idea was to sort of present them to an audience in a non-conventional way. So I made these cubes, this cube, actually one cube, which you can see in the other room. And I wanted to see what people thought about that, what it made them feel without knowing what these characters mean. And there's also a bit of an interaction there. If you go to the other room, you can also sort of contribute to this asemic writing by writing a character and saying what that word means. Yeah, thank you. And a special mention to AC for helping me with the code, Alison for this wonderful class, Nora for a very interesting feedback and interesting ideas, and Casey, my roommate, who may be here, for letting me use his laptop.
Hi, I'm AC. Before I talk about my project, I kind of just wanted to talk about my experience in code societies in general. There is like a dizzying array of things and stuff and thoughts that were put in my head and shared among us. But throughout this session, I found myself coming back to a couple themes that ended up being in my showcase project. I became really interested in how corporate interests and capital and capitalism has fundamentally shaped the way that we interact with technology, and especially in computers, and how that is mostly a system of control and loss of agency, not only in the software we use, but as a developer in fundamentally the way that we think of software and coding. And so I began to think about what would it be like for people who had a fundamentally different relationship with computers. who saw it not as a way of control, but as a medium for a deep spiritual practice, or as a way to create beautiful objects. And these themes kind of coalesced into this thought experiment of a future people called the Sim. They're a mid-22nd century spiritual techno cult. And they're really interesting because the way that they interacted with computers was fundamentally against control or domination, and more about a medium for spiritual practices. And I began thinking about what kind of artifacts would these people leave behind? What would this look like? And so I created these kind of pieces that kind of addressed these questions. And so the process of this was using generated Acemic writings, and then it was made on the plotter, which you've probably seen working very diligently in the back there. And I just wanted to touch on an interesting thing that I found through this process was when I started using the plotter, I thought of it as a tool of control and precision. But the plotter surprised me by putting its own little spin and touches on the pieces. Apparently, the table I used wasn't very level, and so the plotter started making all these really wild lines in between. And I kind of realized that that I enjoyed this collaboration and started seeing this plotter more as a collaborative agent in this art making and less as something that I was merely controlling. And so you can see it in the back there, along with some of the manuscripts. And I just wanted to thank the organizers of Code Societies, all my wonderful classmates who gave me so many ideas and collaboration, and especially Allison Parrish, who did the class on Acemic writing that was the seed for a lot of this, and Everest Pipkin, who very graciously lent their plotter to the space here for me to use. Thank you.
Hey everyone, my name is Matt. So I put the apple here because I feel like it's a good representation for education. And for me, SFPC was kind of like a second chance for me to say hello to education. And the motto that Melanie talked about a bit, thanks, that Melanie talked about a bit at the beginning of more poetry, less demo, came to be a really powerful sentiment for me, and only up until the end. And so for me, I come from a background of helping organize and attend a lot of student hackathons, and I now work in tech. And it's wild. I feel like I've never really considered that everything really is centered around the demo or the prototype, and it becomes this, like, it affects everything from how you think about the project to how you share it, how you talk about it. And it's just wild that, like, the audience expects a big demo. You're supposed to go out there and just wow people. And that's kind of exactly what I had planned to do. So this was my project idea that I built. Up here you can kind of see there's this view of a bunch of controls and visuals going on. Everyone would pull out their phones, connect to it, and they'd have one of the controls, see themselves controlling it with everyone. And that's what I built, and it was a ton of fun building it. But I realized that I was thinking about it in this manner of centering the demo, and, you know, questions that were coming to mind of like, oh, how do I scale this so everyone can use it? Not like, oh, what am I building? So in place of a demo, I would love if all of us could hum for a couple seconds. So if you'll join me. Hum. Awesome. That was amazing. Thank you. So instead of kind of productionizing this app, I went ahead and started playing around with the world that I had created. And so this is kind of a digital portrait called Winter Warmth. They look like snowballs. And this one is called Sentiments Ago. And this to me feels like a playground that kids will play in. And this is kind of one of the driving ideas behind this was I wanted it to feel like a jam session, feel like a playground where you could, play with each other, see what else others were doing. And one of the inspirations behind this is physical interfaces. So I work in digital design a lot. And I feel like a lot of digital design kind of winds up looking like this over here, where it's more functional, more utility. Whereas, those blocks over there, you can make anything with them. You want to pick them up, play around with them. And when I started bringing these sentiments up to fellow students and TAs, a lot of interesting questions started coming up of, what would nonlinear interfaces look like, or four-dimensional interfaces? Another aspect that I really enjoy is something we all just did, which is sharing creative space. I put this slide together originally planning on the demo, and I realized what I wanted to do was more of these right here and here that are a little more human and less of the chaotic tech stuff that's going on. I want to thank all of you for all the conversations I've had about interfaces, modes of interactions. I feel like there's so much in this world to explore, and so I thank you for that. And so I'll leave you with a story from a book called Aesop's Fables. I found it during this class, and I was able to read this to the class last week, so I'll read it to you now. The Gnat and the Bull. A gnat settled on the horn of a bull and sat there a long time. And then he buzzed into the ear. Oh, all right, so the gnat buzzes, and then the bull just turns, and the gnat's like, yo, let me know if I need to leave. And the bull says, we are not always as important as we think we are. Thanks.
Hi. Okay. My name is Emma Ray Norton. I'm an artist and web developer. The video on the screen is a recording of my mouse clicking through my project, which I've named a collaborative archive of Code Society's ephemera. This project is a webpage, a kind of love letter to this Code Society. By Code Society, I mean the students and teachers with whom I've spent almost every day of the past 3 weeks with in this space with our computers. The project, a collaborative archive of Code Society's ephemera, is all at once a love letter and an archive and a well of shared knowledge. It is far from complete, but I also don't want it to ever be complete. I think its incompleteness speaks to the many open questions which have been posed to us and that we have posed to each other. For me, Code Societies was an entanglement of ideas, movement, and metaphor. We listened to each other, moved our bodies through space, and shared with each other ways of seeing the world and ourselves. In each class, and in the case of this webpage, each layer, instead of scratching the surface, we first considered whatever lied beneath. I like to think about the internet this way, and what it really looks like underneath. I like to remember that it is a physical thing, and a lot of it is sitting on and under the earth, not in the clouds. I was nervous to call this webpage a metaphor for anything, but I think it does speak to the many layers of understanding needed for thinking about code and society and their many relationships to one another. Something else I was thinking about while making this archive is a word that kept weaving its way in and out of our classes: care. You can see it appear here and there throughout the site. I have made many websites over the past 8 years, and I think this is the one that I made with the most care. This might be because I wasn't trying to make a finished thing. Instead, I was trying to collect all of the ephemera from our time together in a way that spoke to the nature of the kind of learning that we did. I think the site reflects the fact that we did so much exploring and listening and sharing. This is what I wish it felt like to be on the internet. I don't necessarily want things to be searchable with finite results or unconstructed paths, because that's not how I think or how I want to move through the world. Before I set out to make this page, I took some time to think about what a website made with care really meant. Technically, it meant moving really slow, prioritizing accessibility, and typing out each and every line of code by hand. I wanted to take responsibility for the placement and context of each element. I think a lot about how standardization of a technology can start to erode freedom of choice. I didn't want to define a structure that couldn't ever be changed by someone else or create just one rule that defined a particular style. All of the content on this webpage can be copied and pasted directly from the browser. There's a lot of code, but there are no hyperlinks. It was meaningful to me to move all of the content, which we collected on proprietary platforms like Slack and Google Drive, into a folder on a desktop, which could be directly shared between peers. I can't stop thinking about folders, by the way. What even is a folder on my desktop? What kind of computation is necessary for a folder to open when I click on it? Is computation always and necessarily about power, since I am always commanding my computer to do things? My hope is that a future code society, or someone with this folder on their desktop, can sift through all the layers slowly. Maybe they will find something surprising or engaging enough to go back out into the world, or maybe just back onto the internet to find out more. Thank you.
Hey, thanks so much for hanging out for an hour and a half of the program. I'm Tae-Yoon Choi. I'm a co-founder of the School for Poetic Computation. And I just want to say a few words to finish the day. And I will say that Melanie was a student 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago at the School for Poetic Computation. And it's just really heartwarming and inspiring to see her become the teaching assistant and then teacher and then organizing these wonderful sessions 2 in a row, because we had a similar session last summer. So I asked her to come back and do this. And I'm going to need all of your help to inspire her to do it again. So please ask her to do it again in the summertime of 2019. It's going to take a lot of work, but it'll be worth it. And I just want to say thanks to the first-time teachers like Fluct, Nora Khan, and I think, who else? Bufu, who have been just so inspiring. Ingrid taught here before, but yeah. I think the idea of the School for Poetic Computation is that it should be a place that you learn and that you learn to teach and you offer something in return. And I have been just so inspired by the generosity of the teachers and students, and to operate from a place of plentifulness and resourcefulness and generosity instead of this very deprived and kind of space of lack, where we can't afford to be generous with our ideas and skills. I think that shift is really important, and out of all the programs that we have done, Code Societies has built in the code of conduct and attention to the details of how we talk to each other and how we become a community into the program. And I think that just manifests through these events like this, and I'm inspired and I want to see more of that. There's a few events coming up. Next month, there's a 2 weeks program called Code, Paper, Scissors, run by Robbie Kraft and Kelly Anderson. The admissions for that is complete, but we have an open event in February 17th, which I believe is Sunday, which will be an exhibition of the work in progress for origami, mathematically designed and crafted paper projects. So please come for that. And we have some workshops coming up that were just announced today. So Movement, Memory, and the Unconscious Resource by Corey Krasicki, who's a dancer choreographer. She was a part of the Merce Cunningham dance understudy group. There's a Corey at the center of the picture. It's a dance class. It's going to happen on Sundays here in February. Please check it out, and we love to do more of a performative things at the space. Put into Words, a writing class for artists and technologists, workshop by Joanne McNeil, who is an author and a critic, a curator. And this is going to happen in March over 3 days consecutively. So it's a Friday to Sunday. And the class was designed to help designers, artists, technologists to become authors and write their own essays. lastly, we will do 10 weeks programs, which is our main program. And that's going to be September 17th to November 15th. And we are still working on the application, which will go live around April. And that's where we focus most of our energy in, because these short programs are of topic-based, and then the 10-week programs are much more about building a toolkit for students to become teachers and artists of their own. And I think last thing is that for the amazing participants of the Code Societies, I would like to ask you to interpret your experience of the Code Societies, fork it like a code, and then clone it, and become a teacher and organizer on your own. I hope to see many iterations of the Code Societies in different communities in your own ways. And I think that's how we can expand what we do here at the School for Poetic Computation. And I think that's it. And let's welcome Melanie back.
Thank you so much, Taeyoon, and thank you for inviting me to do this again. And thank you to all the students for amazing presentations. It was so fun to see all your work. Yeah, another round of applause. So right after I close this, we're all going to take a group photo. This is logistics for just the students, where all the students are going to come up here, and we're going to take one last group photo. So Taeyoon gave that assignment that he just mentioned on the last day of Code Society's summer 2018. He asked all the students to fork all the syllabi that made up Code Societies and edit it and morph it and bring it to the communities that matter to them most, or the communities that they were a part of. And he just mentioned it now for the students, and I want to extend it to all of you, community, the people who are not on this slide. I didn't mention the part of the one element that makes this possible is the community and you to come here and support all the students to share all their work. So thank you for coming and take on that assignment. It's due in 5 years to share Code Society's syllabi and change it. It's all public, so please take that and share with your own people. And I just want to thank everyone for coming, all the students and all the teachers and my mom, who's right there. And yeah, thank you for coming. Thanks so much. So the exhibition is in the back room. Take a poster, see the plotter, plot a drawing. If you think you've taken enough posters, take another one. Okay, group photo.
That was great.
And teachers too.
Allison, don't leave.